welcome to you. I reckon this is a tough set of readings for you three, and it is really getting into crunch time in Jesus' public life, and there's some sand grit at the moment. So let's hear from Nikki, from Alec, and from Julian. But Julian, help us first of all with a little bit of background.
Yeah, as you say, this is a pretty intense passage, really, but it does come in the midst of some really intense stuff all around, like beginning in chapter 21 with Jesus arriving in Jerusalem and the setting up this big clash with the religious authorities, really, with the cleansing of the temple, cursing the fig tree. They start questioning him, and he's responding with a series of parables that are pretty pointed or slashing, as I read somewhere, which I thought was quite good. But yes, in this one we've had sons, we've had tenants, and now we've got wedding guests, and they're all kind of, symbolic of these religious leaders, and Jesus is pretty harsh here. But this wedding invitation one is particularly interesting. And I think in terms of background, the key thing we sort of need to just be aware of is that while when we get a wedding invitation, we RSVP and say we're coming certain day, certain time, and we're there. Back then you would have a wedding invitation that you did RSVP to, say, yes, I'll come. But then closer to the time, it would be like, right, now it's ready. Now it's on this day. And so it's sort of like a second invitation. But just to let you know when to come, you'd already said you were going to come. So they have already actually accepted that responsibility or obligation or honour to come to the wedding.
And it'd be interesting to unpack this because you are using some heavy words there: obligation, honour. So we'll see where that takes us. It's not just about wearing the wrong suit, I suspect, but we'll find out. Let's go to where we find it challenging. And Alec, talk to me about challenge in these passages, because they're kind of almost separate passages. But yeah.
Well, for me, of course, I find the piece about being thrown out of the banquet the challenging piece, and not just because of that particular piece of the story, but because in general, I find that it runs against the tone of who I understand Jesus to be. Acceptance, love, generosity, which shows itself in the earlier part of the passage. But for me, it's a symbol of a lot of the stuff in the gospel. How do you figure which is the authentic piece of Jesus's preaching without trying to somehow re-edit the Bible into a way which suits us? So I find the piece where he's being thrown out unhelpful, and to me it runs against the way that Jesus preaches, but I don't want to re-edit the Bible for my benefit.
I find that a really powerful issue, and let's see how it affects the rest of the conversation. So, Nikki, talk to me about where you find a challenge.
I think the challenge comes from how we choose to interpret the entire parable. Can we read this parable completely through fresh eyes, which we say often, but particularly in this case? So I did a little bit of background reading, got a couple of different opposite perspectives, and I've come to no conclusion. So the challenge for me is, there are two ways to see this. Is God actually represented as the king, or the dude who is chucked out into the darkness? Is that actually what the kingdom of heaven is like? Someone who shows up and says no to the decadence, no to the facade, and no to the show, and they're cast out into the darkness to become the light.
Well, there's a kind of interpretive gauntlet thrown at our feet. Julian, do you want to play ball with that gauntlet, if I can mix my metaphors?
Oh, hang on.
I didn't hear it. That's okay.
So can I just add, while we're here, that if God is the king, then that doesn't make for a very nice God. Hence the extra difficulty of casting someone out who's not wearing the right thing.
So is this about Gucci suits? I mean, this is uncomfortable stuff. Maybe Gillian's possibly been raptured, of course, which could be a problem.
Yeah, because we haven't.
We haven't. Left behind again.
Nikki, thank you. That was very helpful thought. And I actually agree with you that somehow it is about how on earth do you reimagine these things, because we get so caught in the way we've always heard it and the way we've always been taught it. there is always something new to learn about God, and I imagine that I've got about 1/1,000,000th of a percentage of knowing something about it. But
there's that lovely saying of Karl Barth, when towards the end of his life he was asked if he, sort of felt he knew it all, and he said, "I've dipped my toe in the ocean, and the degree to which the water levels have lowered because some moisture's come out on my foot is the degree to which I understand God." Welcome back, Julian. I'm going to go and backpedal. So Julian, we're raising questions about what suits us in the passage. We're raising about using fresh eyes to read the passage. Where do you find challenge here?
I guess, like the others, my challenge is I wish it finished at verse 10 instead of verse 14. And, it is that struggle of dealing with parts of the scripture we don't feel comfortable with, or how do we wrestle with it? And the idea perhaps is to wrestle with it like Jacob until we find a blessing, perhaps. But for me, it was just like, my challenge was like, who do I see myself as in this story? Am I like one of the invited guests who's kind of said yes to God, but then just hasn't really chosen to show up, who's more concerned about my own kind of business than God's business? Or am I one of those ones who's been brought in through grace and felt relieved about that, but then perhaps hasn't really done anything with that either in terms of them not wearing the right clothes? And the challenge there, I suppose, for me too, is also not to take that moral high ground and kind of go, oh, the Jewish leaders, they didn't recognize Jesus.
And that's a huge challenge in this whole sequence of parables, which has been used so demonically in the history of Christianity. So thank you for raising that too. But I might be feeling a little bit glum now, and it's a bad enough week in terms of world news. Please, Alec, bring me some good news here.
For me, obviously, the good news is that even though I wasn't on the original list of people to be invited, and I'm a person who is considered a bad person by the rest of the world, I can still get an invitation to be here. That there's room for all of us to be at the feast, and all of us can get a call up to fill the spaces. And for me, that's just such astonishingly good news. You're never beyond the point of redemption and being able to be acceptable.
That's very powerful and comforting as well. So let's explore that. Let's find out where that takes us. But Julian, for you, where do you zone in on some good news?
I mean, I love weddings. I love taking weddings. I love going to weddings. And I feel like this is like we actually get an invitation to like the royal wedding, like actually to instead of staying up all night and watching it on TV, actually being there at Kate and William's, or going back to, Charles and Diana's wedding, or whichever one it was that we've stayed up to watch. And it's kind of like there's all you can eat. It's like there'd be a full angelic choir there. The starry heavens is like the canopy, and beloved friends and family all there, and wearing the right and the best clothes. So that is the good news, but getting back to that challenge.
I'm just as an aside here going to point out that I was at Nikki's wedding to Rick, and Nikki was at Anne and our wedding, and there's kind of a conviviality about that. But you're absolutely right. There's this joy, there's this wonderful joy of life that breaks into the scene. So, Nikki, good news?
Absolutely. It's a thrill that all are invited and all are welcome. This is not my idea, but a little snippet that I had read was picking up on the garment, and they weren't wearing the right robe, and that for maybe Matthew's people, as they listened or heard this parable being spoken, that they would have picked up that the robe was this baptismal garment, and baptism is about being transformed and taking on change and allowing Jesus to change us. So in all of this story, that is a simple story, but it's not about something that's simple, if you like, that the banquet is there for all who understand the things that really matter, that what really matters is allowing Jesus to make a difference in you. And that kind of discipleship, transformative kind of power, all are welcome in that space. And we get the invitation. So again, I'm still grappling with the challenge that I said at the beginning. I haven't decided if I have even chosen a particular interpretation. And I've got them at different opposing ends of interpretation, if you like, but I'm still working on it. I think that's where we all need to be. That in itself is good news.
Well, it is good news, and I'm feeling that come through despite the darkness of this passage. And certainly there's something there that you're hinting at about not saying no to this opportunity of grace. And I'm hearing other things too, but that stands out for me. Maybe that's something that we can explore, the kind of so what. Julian, what do you do with this? The so what when we apply it now every day?
Oh, I just love that actually you can get fashion tips from the Bible, right? Like what to wear. And whole thing of clothing in the Bible is so symbolic. And I just did a quick little search, like First Peter, be clothed with humility, or Ephesians 6, be clothed in the armor, put on the armor of God, or Revelation 19, the white linen, and that sort of those righteous deeds, or be clothed with Christ from Galatians 3, or Colossians 3, compassion, kindness, humility, and patience, clothe yourself in those things. And then even further, Luke 3 telling it, and Jesus saying, if you've got two cloaks, give one to another person. So lots of sort of cool fashion tips in terms of the so what there for me.
Yeah, they're very much in the realm of, I guess, God's gifting and aspects like that. Alec, so what?
The so what for me is about, it's great that I am able to be acceptable to God no matter what. And I'm really appreciative of that. Reminds me that it's not about me, but it's about Jesus's offer and gifting to me of that invitation. But that also somewhere in there, I need to remember that just because I have this invitation, I can't just now go to sleep. There is an invitation to be at the wedding, and it has implications about how I live and what I do. And I'm pretty strong on in my life about talking about the love of God and the absolute love of God and all of that sort of kind of stuff. And because I think it's true and it's my experience, but it doesn't give me the right to not try to be continuing to grow in that being loving myself. And so that's the so what. And my suspicion is that somehow that's where the robe and being thrown out difficulty sits. It's about people who had the invitation, were willing to be there, but then weren't willing somehow to engage with that in a way which made a meaningful difference. And that's, for me, I guess, what I'm trying to do is figure out how I make a meaningful connection.
And thank you for that again, because that's so what leaves a challenge with us about exploring, but not being complacent. That's really important to take away from this. So let's end up with you, Nikki, and ask, so what in your world?
Oh, so what? I think this is a parable that reminds us to read the Bible with our contemporary Bible goggles, if you like, and to always ask ourselves, what are our preconceived ideas of God? So we could look at this gospel reading and remember that there is a kind of a nicer version in Luke, for example. We could go down that path. So what? Sometimes that's okay too. The big question, though, that takes us into our world is our own lived faith transformed? And how do we do that? And does that mean walking in darkness from time to time? Does it mean answering and accepting an invitation that's given to us? Because each and every week we are, if you like, invited to a banquet, we could say in the form of the Eucharist, and we don't have to attend, we do not have to participate, but we all have the right to attend, and we can take that into our church lives, our parish lives, wherever we do ministry within school, and get that message across. All are invited. What does that look like for you? And be transformed.
Grace, responsibility. That's been a really powerful conversation for me in very difficult passages. It's been a difficult week in world history, and it's good to find good news in a difficult place. So I really appreciate Nikki from Brisbane, Alec and Julian here in Dunedin. I think bringing some real honesty to this passage, and let's go out into God's world and find out how we can apply it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.